Right. So as I was looking at a couple of reports over the last few days, came across a news piece that China, very interestingly, has signed a $400 billion deal with the Russians to ensure oil supply over the next 30 years. Brilliant. So then you think about other headlines which keep coming in the papers, whether it's Iraq or Iran or Ukraine or the changing order. You read about Western economies which have strategic oil reserves which can last up to 180 days. You read about all of this and then you wonder, so what's happening here? And we go back to our local headlines, price of oil up by $1 and the whole domino chain that I just described. So very easy to blame the politicians, the leaders. We do that very well in the media and in the public at large. But here, let's start by getting their view first. How do they look at the situation so far? So, sir, I'd like to hear from you how you rate India in its quest for energy security, what we have achieved and a lot of what we've missed perhaps over the last several years.
Yeah, well, I think there are two dimensions of this, three really. One dimension is, and I take it up from what Mr. Taneja was saying, this issue of energy illiteracy. Many of our decisions that we take on energy are forced by that part of democracy which is perhaps the least attractive part of democracy, described variously as populism, short-sightedness, short-term gain, etc., etc. And I think this is something that all political parties have to face sooner or later, how our democracy can mature into taking decisions that are in the national interest, more enlightened, more far-sighted, and where you're willing and prepared to take some sacrifices in the long run. The other dimension, and that's an important one, is how we engage with the world for energy security. Now, we have to engage with the world in the energy security, keeping in mind that there are competing forces, and you can't just, in exclusion of everything else that we do with the rest of the world, have special relationships on energy, unless it is to the extent that people who are producers need consumers as well. So taking the scenario, what might happen in the Middle East, for instance, and the retreat or withdrawal by United States in terms of their strategic interest with the emergence of the shale revolution, and the expectation sometimes that we are asked as to whether we would be willing to step in some form or the other into that vacuum, we have to keep in mind that our relationship with an area of interest in security, energy security, will need engagement in different forms. Now, when we speak of the Middle East, for instance, there is a crack developing in the Middle East, which is a very serious crack, and that's the Shia-Sunni conflict. We had the best of relations with Iran. We had, in the past, and in the recent past as well, wonderful, growing, enhancing relationship with Iraq. We have, I think, a reasonably good relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Oman, with the UAE. And indeed, we have, I think, acceptable, reasonable relationship in the gas-rich region of Central Asia. We were able to work in a reasonable equilibrium with the United States and Russia. But suddenly, over the past 1 year, the world is getting into greater conflicts of the kind that will make us, push us into a position where we will have to take a call. On Ukraine, I think we came the closest to the most difficult dilemma that the Indian people could face. So we are in trouble. We are in trouble about having to take decisions that obviously will impact our energy security for time to come. The second thing is that when we think of, and initially I thought we were going to talk about China's growing impact and influence in our region, we have to keep in mind that wherever we go, at least in some forms of energy, China will be competing with us. The footprint in our larger neighborhood, the footprint in Africa, China has a footprint there. Now there is a distinct advantage that India has had over China over the centuries, and we retain that advantage. Special connectivity, people-to-people connectivity that we have with Central Asia, that we have with Africa, we will retain. How we develop it, I think, is a big question. We shouldn't lose sight of that special connectivity only in looking at commercial deals. That special connectivity, even today, when China gets in with much greater resources, gives us an advantage. The models that we have used in Africa, for instance, the models that we have used in Central Asia and in the Middle East are different from the model from China. So we shouldn't feel self-conscious about not having resources as China has, and certainly not having some of the advantages that China has distinctly had over us over the last few decades. We have a special thing going for us in this entire region. But important decisions will need to be taken at home, and important decisions will then have to be implemented in terms of keeping this connectivity alive.
So how critical is energy, as of now, in your experience over the years, has been when it comes to foreign policies? We heard Mr. Taneja say for some countries like Germany and others, energy really perhaps is the fulcrum of the way foreign policy is being governed. How has it been so far for India, and is it time to perhaps change it?
Well, it's difficult. It's difficult for India because, you know, it's like looking at a buyer's market and looking at a seller's market. In a curious sort of way, when you're talking of Germany, you're not talking of a buyer's market. You're talking of a seller's market, and certainly not talking of a buyer's market where the sellers need a buyer. India has to have a multi-dimensional approach. I think we will get nowhere if we limit ourselves to specialist energy security positions, because that's not been India's foreign policy. We haven't had exclusivity in our foreign policy. We cannot afford exclusivity in our foreign policy. What we need really is a 21st century model of non-alignment, which doesn't mean that you disengage and remain aloof from everybody, but you have a special advantage in being able to deal with different countries. And I give you an example. The example is when nobody was talking to Iran, we were still continuing to buy oil from Iran. We made it clear to the United States of America that we have a special relationship with Iran. We continued to talk to Iran. We continued to deal with Iran. But of course, at the same time, we kept ourselves just short of the sanctions that the United States was imposing without accepting the sanctions. Now, only India could have done something of that nature. The same thing has been possible really between Israel and Palestine. India has a very special relationship. India seems to be the only country that various countries that don't talk to each other will continue to talk to India. We have kept ourselves in a relatively low profile in these matters, but I think it's important that we raise our profile. But in raising our profile, once again, as I said, the special connectivity we have, we'll need to put in more energy and put in more effort into that special connectivity.
Okay, so let's get some thoughts in from Mr. Prabhu as well. Sir, your thoughts on how successful or far away from success we have been. And Sir mentioned Iran, but have we really missed a couple of years and decades perhaps with the Russians when it comes to securing our future a little better? It's only now that we're talking about this $40 billion pipeline that hopefully will get us some oil. The Chinese have taken a huge advantage over us, haven't they?
Yeah, you know, just to bring your first question back into focus, this energy security is, in my opinion, one of the most critical issue for India. Because, in fact, if you look at anything, that the problem that we face, the theme of this conference itself, talking about removing inequality. The biggest inequality in India is on account of energy. And in fact, if you really provide that, and then that inequality cannot be guaranteed, the inequality cannot be removed, and equality cannot be guaranteed unless we have enough energy. So energy security becomes an important issue even in that context. So now to make that happen, I think we need to look at it in many ways. First is, of course, why do we need energy? That becomes the first question. We need it for mobility, for transportation, other issues. We need it for electricity and other purposes. So I think we really need to, therefore, when you look at energy security, what Salman was talking about is essentially in terms of getting liquid fuel, gas, oil from outside. Of course, we are not very happy with that, it looks like. So we are going to import almost 173 million tons of coal and now becoming 200 million tons of coal. So we said we'll import everything.
Coal is a fantastic subject in itself. When we keep reading the fourth or fifth largest reserves of coal and our
So
power
therefore,
plants are...
But we thought, why we should discriminate between imports. We should import all forms of energy. So that way we are removing inequality on that count. But so look at it. So in this situation, the challenge is that how do you then secure our energy future? And how much part of that is in terms of beyond our shores and something within our own country. So in fact, what you're asking, and he said, I agree with him, that when it comes to whether we willy-nilly we accept it, that we have to import, then we must have the type of foreign policy to support it. We also need not just foreign policy, but to actually physically secure the supplies, we need also probably a type of military apparatus, maybe Navy, to make sure that we actually secure our supply lines properly. So I think, therefore, this is a very vexed issue, very complex issue. In terms of Russia, I think it's a very important issue. Of course, China has already stolen over us, you said $400 billion, but that's only one part of China. They're now trying to link another part of China, if it is east or west, I forget, but now they're trying to link another pipeline with west, with probably higher or equal amount of gas. But of course, this is something very interesting, is that we still don't know how much of that China is going to get it at what price. Of course, that we don't know. But China has done a great thing in terms of getting this out. Whether we like it or not, we have such good relationship, and thanks to our diaspora all over, particularly in Africa, we have some advantage of that, and particularly the relationship that we have built in the early days of NAM. But now, the challenge is China with $4 trillion of foreign exchange reserves, and the huge military might that they're trying to create as a result of modernizing the army, navy, PLA becoming more assertive. I don't know how far you'll be able to compete with China. So therefore, one way to look at it is, how do you, in this context?
It's really not competition with China, I think. It's more about securing ourselves. We don't care how much the Chinese go and import. As long as we have our fill and we have it with a reasonable amount of certainty, to deal with the fluctuation of prices.
I know, but that's why, ultimately, if you look at it, wherever we go, the Chinese are already there. In fact, with Russia, we did something in Sakhalin. That was what we did in about 10, 12 years ago. And that has been a very successful the oil and gas field. But I think we really need to do more. But Chinese you must accept that Chinese are going to do so many things. You go to any African capital now, you have a big friendship hall, something hall you buy by whatever name. These are all built by Chinese. Sports stadiums are built by the Chinese. Why so far away? Even an immediate neighbor in Sri Lanka, the Chinese have constructed their Bandaranaike International Center, huge complex with their money. So China is not just trying to secure oil fields by putting money into oil or gas fields, but they are trying to do so many things beyond that in terms of giving assistance, soft and hard support that they give to the country. So I think it's going to be more and more difficult in the years to come. So I personally feel what we really need to do in that context is try to work on that, but make sure that domestically we also secure ourselves better. So in terms of making sure that we don't have to import that much as we really need to import, and that should be the best strategy as far as energy security is concerned.
I will just come to local in a second before we wind down the international question here. So your thoughts on Russia and on, no point looking at the past, but just engagement from here on, how should it be?
Well, I think that we underestimate our relationship with Russia. There is a lot of fanfare and pomp and show in our engagement with the United States of America, and of course, much of that has to do with a vast network of social and business links that we have with the United States of America. But I think in terms of the expanse and the depth of our strategic relationship with Russia, despite the fact that the glorious heydays of Indo-Russian friendship are no longer there, because they have many other factors that engage them in their foreign policy. But I think in terms of depth and the expanse of our relationship, it's terrific. It's really very good. And particularly in terms of our cooperation in civil nuclear program. I mean, we are still stuck, as we were just told, on the civil nuclear program with the United States, but with Russia, we move forward. We've signed now Curriculum 3 and 4. That was not easy. And that was despite all the impediments that seemingly are there because of the legislation. But we moved forward. There will be more power plants built by them. In terms of strategic strength, we have enormous strength with Russia. But again, Russia is getting into conflicts that we find difficult to support for historical reasons that we have to secure.
And I'd just like to come in over there, because that's where the balance really seems to be shifting, perhaps very interesting times, because one gets the sense that the Western world is now no longer willing to rely that much on Russia for conventional energy sources. Europe seems to be importing a lot from the Americas as well. So the question being, how does India look at its engagement? Traditionally, our partners have been all in the Middle East, but should we be looking at a different sort of engagement for conventional energy from Russia?
Well, I think that the unstated premise is that we are moving forward, and the present government has endorsed what we thought was a good idea, and that was to open up channels through Chabahar right across Iran. Multimodal travel across Iran, pipelines, getting into Central Asia, and then obviously ultimately into Russia. And then there may well be opportunity for us to open up opportunities in part of the Europe that abuts on Russia. So I think the potential there is wonderful. And then we must keep it in mind that if somebody else doesn't buy from Russia, Russia needs a customer to sell its power to. So why not us?
So we can look forward to support from your party if the current regime is looking at perhaps deeper energy ties with Russia, irrespective of their position in the international slight,
See, I see no reason. I think on energy security, I don't think that I see any departure or any discordance between the UPA and the broad UPA spectrum and the present government. But you can never tell. In international politics, you can never tell what happens tomorrow. I mean, we see things playing out in Gaza. We see things happening in Ukraine. We've seen terrible things happen in Europe in the last 20 years. So it's difficult to tell what might happen tomorrow. But I think today, we seem to be on the same page.
So question, in the international borders continue, now let's talk local, as you were saying. What can we do here within our country, do better and do more smartly perhaps in the next 5 years to empower us?
Obviously, the energy, that's why I was saying, why do you need energy for? So that's very important. So if you take the mobility, the liquid fuel out of it, and you really look at it, the electricity part of it, which is in fact going to impact more and more people, it's something that should be thought about completely differently. Like we had a model for a long time where we thought that we have a centralized generation, then transmit it generally, and then distribute it locally. I think we really relook at this whole model itself by saying, is it not possible that we could have a distributed generation? And then that also is on a premise that we have local resources available which could be used and harnessed for generating electricity, which was probably 20, 25 years ago we were not aware of as much as we are aware of it today in terms of technological development, in terms of usage. And now we have fairly good experience globally as well as in the country to make it happen. So I think if you can change this model and try to bring in distributed generation in a significant way, that could actually reduce this energy poverty, the word my friend used, very quickly. So we'll be able to then provide electricity to a large number of people in the shortest possible time, with probably, I'm not talking about cost in that way, because probably centralized model would score over cost in one way. But if you take the life cycle cost, probably this could be even far better. And also in terms of using that sources of energy, which are locally available. It is not that coal is available in east of India. Therefore, there was a good argument and even continues to be a good argument in my opinion, to have peated power plants, because we don't have to transport coal to a generating station, because actually the Indian coal, which has 30-40% high ash content, will probably am transporting more ash than coal. Of course, the Environment Ministry has put restriction on terms of transport. But point is, locally available resources like solar energy, wind, maybe not that to that extent, but even biomass, they are available locally in any case. So why not harness it there and distribute it there? If we do that, that would mean that probably our reliance on the import also will go down, because obviously we need large quantities of import for coal, for example, because we have a 3,000-4,000 coal power plants. So this could happen. Again, I must caution by saying I'm not even advocating and saying that it can happen tomorrow, or it can even happen in 5 years. Because the transition from the present energy mix will not happen immediately. But we must target a change, we must work on it, and then it will happen. And then there are a lot of other advantages associated with. That's why I was saying if you take life cycle cost. Now, for example, if you want a big power plant, you need huge land. And land anywhere is a problem, even if 1 acre is a problem and 10,000 acres is a problem. But 1 acre is not as big a problem as 10,000 acres of land to be acquired for one single project is a problem. So therefore, if you are going to locate different plant, that happens. Secondly, our entire idea of making sure that we empower people. You know, China, which always give an example of China, and they did something phenomenally well. China has the single largest hydroelectric plant in the world, 3 gauges. But also China has several hundreds of thousands of small little plants wherein they generate even smallest form of electricity, wherever possible, maybe run of the river, to this largest plant. So I think we should also think about that in terms of making sure that small little plants also should be built along with the large plant that we are building, try to decentralize generation and distribution, whereby the local population will be able to actually run them. And therefore, either local self-governments or cooperatives or some other form of organization which could run them. Why I was telling about China is China's example of this, even energy, large and small, but even in business, China is very big conglomerate. ICBC is the largest bank in the world. But at the same time, China has a lot of small businesses, and they were built along with the support from the local self-government.
You know, speaking of big and small, so numbers obviously always fascinating. Coal production, 557 million tons in 2012-13, needs to go up to about 795 million by 16-17. These are the latest plan estimates. So that's a jump of 43%. Coal India annually struggles to do a single-digit percentage gain in output every year. And now we are hearing a lot of talk about restructuring or unbundling, or what do you do with this behemoth? Because obviously we've got coal, we have no idea how to get it to our power plants.
You know, actually, if you really look at it, coal was always in private hands till we nationalized it in the heydays of socialism. Because Coal India was created by acquiring number of coal companies which were working in India. So, you know, whatever may be the reason for it, but coal always has been in the private hand. So we really need to find out ways of making sure that more coal production will come, more capacity addition could take place through that, and that if Coal India cannot handle a particular amount of quantity beyond that, that's the reason that we should try to bring in more players to work on that. And in fact, this again, across the political spectrum, this has been an agreement.
Would you be supportive,
but unfortunately,
of something like the CIL, such a big state monopoly and a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, etc. So if there is talk of either unbundling it or partially privatizing coal mining, is that something that would be sort of,
well, I mean, it's a completely new thought. I think all political parties have divided house on the extent of privatization or disinvestment. We don't call it privatization, we call it disinvestment in this country for a particular reason, that privatization is a bad word. So, I mean, all our parties are divided houses on this. And I think a lot of internal party conversations have to take place to keep that objective in mind, that this is what we need to do. Forget about coal. What about Air India? I mean, on Air India, there are some people who think that it's a bottomless pit in which you can just keep pouring money, and they don't even want to think of a possibility of Air India going into private hands. But really, in this larger scheme of things, just coming back for a moment to China, China is looking at India en route to the eastwards corridor, which will not just be for transit, which will not only just be for trade, but will also be for services, and certainly would be for things like an electrical grid and so on. We are already into exporting power to Bangladesh, obviously with intent that we can get something in return. There is just an incurred sort of a proposal for exporting power from Punjab when the power is available, or from Gujarat when power is available into Pakistan. But it's not worked. It's not worked. So I think we need to look at the larger picture. But there's one point that I just want to flag here, which I noted in the morning in a discussion, is that the whole issue of regulatory authorities and the multiplicity of regulations is a major problem. We were looking at how the Competition Commission and the other regulatory bodies in each sector seem to be working independently of each other. Greater coordination, and who could do that? Would it be best done in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, I mean through the competition setup, or should it be done through other ministries, finance or whatever, is a big question. I think restructuring, reorganizing, and coordinating better on all these sectoral regulatory bodies is something that's called for. Because even if you privatize, you will end up running into trouble with the Competition Commission. So I think what you need to do is to see the larger picture ahead and work step by step towards it.
Well, just very quickly on coal before we move on to gas, which is equally or if not more interesting. Indonesia and what happened, and then what happened at Mundra, everything going completely out of whack, and we're still in litigation, and God alone knows when things will settle. Is there a case for the government to start becoming a little more proactive, even if it is, if it's an importing destination? While, of course, I know that the Indian government here cannot influence local policy in another country, but perhaps engage more directly and more vocally.
Absolutely.
And to tell the other guys that, hey, this is causing a lot of disruptions.
I think absolutely, and I'm sure a lot of people here want to hear that. I think it's absolutely important that the government gets proactive. But if the government is going to get proactive, I have a little caveat there. I have a little caveat, and I hope the CAG and CBI are listening, that they ask questions, why is the government proactive? What is the special interest that the government have to help people in this particular sector, or this particular businessman, or this particular... I think this also needs to be worked out more clearly. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be transparency, accountability, but I think it's important that we build in somewhere the idea of an honest mistake. Honest mistakes will be made when you expand your area of operation and you do things that you haven't done before. You'll make an honest mistake, and I think collectively as a nation, we should recognize what an honest mistake is.
All right, so now let's get some thoughts in on what we've been trying to do so far in terms of foreign participation. So the great fanfare called NELP in its multiple rounds. And then over the last couple of years, we've also seen several international companies submit blocks back because things could never really take off. The whole issue of gas pricing, previous regime sets up a certain formula, the Rangarajan Committee, etc. That, of course, gets put back into a different observatory, and now we'll hopefully have a new policy coming in. But again, it all adds up to just one word, and that's uncertainty, uncertainty, and uncertainty. How does one deal with it then?
No, but this is a challenge of, like just adding one more broader issue that Salman touched about regulation, is an issue about stability of policy. So in fact, I don't think anybody will have any problem with any policy. They will decide not to invest, that's a different matter, but that policy is policy. But I think we should have a very consistent, long-term, sustainable policy. And to make that happen, how do you make that happen? And therefore, I've been saying this, again, now I'm raising a little broader issue. But this is what I've been thinking all the time. So who makes the policy? Who should make the policy? Is domain of only the executive that should make policy? I've been saying this for a long time. I've written about it, spoken in the parliament. Is, by definition, executive means you have to execute. And judiciary today making policy is because the executive was not doing anything. So therefore the judiciary took over the field of vacuum and did it. In my opinion, and this is again, I'm saying something which is a little controversial maybe, that parliament should make policy. And why? Because if you make a policy in the parliament, probably it would have long-term sustainability because it would have a stamp of authority from all the members of the parliament. And that would mean all the political parties. Now, some people would say it will take longer time. Yes, it will. It will take longer time. But then it is always better to, it is the present system in which any government, whether his government, our government, any government, they make in haste and then marry in haste and repent in leisure. Any policy gets, judicial interpretation gets into many other issues. If you have a policy debated in the parliament, and then parliament has standing committees, and I will tell you standing committees of parliament work far, far better than what you see in the media in terms of saying that, this happened, nothing happened in the parliament. A lot of things happen in the standing committees. So if you have a very well-baked policy made in the parliament, and then parliament I include standing committees, and then it is endorsed by the plenary of parliament, that policy no court can question. For obvious reason is that then there is a question about the boundaries that a constitution is laid down for the judiciary and the legislature. Then any executive, whether it is today's government or tomorrow's government, will have to execute it because it's already approved by the parliament. And if somebody wants to make a change, go back to the parliament.
That's fair about a framework.
Just one thing
Please,
on that,
please,
what you, Salman mentioned. It also brings in transparency. Because when you have a policy made not in the four walls of any bhavan, but actually in the parliament, anybody could contribute. And as I will tell you, in the standing committees, they invite through public advertisement a lot of suggestions from different stakeholders. So I think what investor wants is a stability of policy. They want transparency of policy. Probably whatever the checks and balances which will automatically happen because it is already debated to an extent in the parliament. So if you make it like this, I am telling you, this is the only solution in my opinion, because otherwise CAG and all the issues that we keep thinking about will automatically get addressed. So I think we should move towards a system of making policy a domain, a prerogative of the parliament.
So that's, that's a great thought in terms of the overall framework of policy making. Now let's get specific to gas. Because this country thought after years of court battle between private sector companies and the arbitration and no arbitration, etc., finally there was some clarity that you move to $8 plus for price of gas, and then hopefully what is now down to I think 17 or 18 units instead of 80 MMSCMD will start coming out. And then the conspiracy theories that go with this, but never mind those. What can we expect on gas now?
I don't think I'll be able to answer this question, unfortunately. But I think what I really, again, repeat the question as we need a stability, whatever is, and we need to frame policy transparently, should be completely bipartisan. And to make that happen, I don't see any other process than the one that I just spelled out. And I personally feel that if you really look at it, then it will happen. The second part, which he mentioned, and if you permit me to say that one of the questions he mentioned, a very important one, that's what I'm saying, is about this whole decision-making process. Nobody wants to take decision in India today. Because not taking decision, there is a premium. You will get promoted as somebody.
And decisions also, there are certain commercial realities, and then there is the politics of,
I know. But that's why I'm saying, if you look at all these commercial angles, see, ultimately, whether you take any decision on any economic issue, there is a commercial interest automatically. Either it's a state's commercial interest or it's a private commercial interest. But it's a commercial interest. And I don't think anybody should be really frowning upon commercial interest. Because ultimately the whole idea of growing economy means we want more and more people should get involved into taking commercial decisions.
All about reasonable returns, exactly.
Only issue is whether a public policy is made in a way that favors a particular section of economic activity makers against the larger public interest. That's the only issue we should try to do it, and the trade-off has to be properly spelled out. But the point I'm saying therefore is, how do you make sure that the decision making is not hampered by the fact that always the nagging fear of my mother-in-law and my father-in-law looking at me all the time when I'm talking to my wife. So that is always a fear. So how do you make that? And therefore I think we really need to codify the roles of all the functionaries who are political functionaries, either ministers or minister of states, or the bureaucrats. There has not been a proper codification and demarcation of roles and responsibilities. You must very clearly define them, including the roles of members of parliament. For example, if member of parliament writes to somebody, say recommending something, he could be hauled up by saying that, you have done something wrong. If he doesn't do it, he's hauled up by his own electorate for not doing anything. So now how does he figure what does he do in that? So codify the roles, codify the responsibilities. That itself will bring down the level of fear Because you can always say this is absolutely within my powers. I was supposed to do it, and then I had to do it. So therefore, I think we really need to look at some of the issues in a far greater way, because we are actually, even today, after all these scams and issues that we talked about, a lot of media space was covered by that, but we are not trying to find out how to prevent it, how to address these challenges in terms of making systemic changes, which are not addressed at all. And therefore, I think only down the line, you'll always see some other thing coming up. So rather than that, and then it hampers the investment climate. It creates a big challenge. Like, for example, just look at it, this coal allocation. The previous government did it. What was the objective? To increase coal production. What exactly happened was the present production is affected. So it is counterproductive when you take a decision of a kind which are getting into controversies, where then courts come in and then nothing happens. So I am just saying to make sure that you must address an issue in a way that there is now we have a history. We know exactly the problems have arisen. How do you ensure that those problems will not arise again? Otherwise, after some time, 10 foreign companies are gone, as you said, 100 will go away. Then another 10,000 Indian companies will also move out. What is going to be the result? So make sure that policy, stable, transparent, and clear. Secondly, the policy implementation, have codification of that. Do all these things, I am sure the atmosphere will improve.
You know, as we wind up, sir, thoughts on a point that was raised earlier by a member from the audience on tariffs. It's such a thin line, and energy is such a subject, and it's so easy to politicize, whether it's power cost, gas cost, CNG prices go up by 2 rupees in Delhi, hue and cry. It's so easy to fall to political agendas when it comes to energy. So how is it that we'll hope and we'll expect from our politicians to put some of these political agendas perhaps a little on the back burner for a bit till we ensure the larger objective?
Well, I think there are some of these things that you can't avoid, and I think if it means somebody has to sacrifice themselves as you go along, and the system, both of your economy as well as your democracy, your political economy, as to, so to speak, matures. And I think along the way, some people will drop dead. Just too bad. But I think as long as we keep moving in the right direction, it's fine. As we mature as a democracy and as an economy, a lot of this will just disappear. You can work towards making it disappear, but to think that I should not be the one who has to make a sacrifice, my party should not make a sacrifice. If we all have that attitude, we'll never move forward. So I think you just have to accept some of this as being inevitable, but try and protect yourself to the extent possible, protect the economy to the extent possible, and some of the things that has just been said, Suresh just said, we need to look at the larger picture. One of the things that we haven't done in the country is a serious look at administrative reforms. Call them institutional reforms if you like. We've done some economic reforms, but we've done very little of institutional reforms. And I think that for a government that is not in a crisis, this should be one priority. And I think it is important that the opposition, different parties, he spoke of a bipartisan consensus, but obviously we have so many parties in the country that you have a multi-partisan consensus, if it's possible, and then we move forward institutionally. There will be some losers, some winners in it, but I think if you make a condition and I must not lose anything, we will not get anywhere in this country.
So as we've heard so often in the last couple of weeks, the bitter pill for the achhe din. So if the bitter pills are administered, whether that means deregulation of diesel, whether that means slightly higher power tariffs, etc., will your party be supportive, or can we expect constructive opposition?
Let me just tell you, in politics, we all understand, in politics there are things that you do because you really believe they should not happen, and there are things that you do because you think it's important to say that they should not happen. And everybody can judge what is the level to which you will go and where you will stop. But I think it's important that if something is good for the country, you should just move on. And as Mr. Taneja said, it's important educating your population, educating your citizenry is very important. Illiteracy at least should not. Somebody's selfish interest may come in the way, but at least ignorance and illiteracy should not come in the way.
Well, brilliant. We hope we can have this sort of understanding even at a larger national level in our parliament as well to move forward. Let's throw it open to the audience for questions. I'm sure there are several.
Just one thing I'll just tell you,
Unfortunately, two of the best people are not in parliament these days.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, contrary to the belief that a lot of things happen in the parliament with a lot of understanding with more political parties. And that's how the standing committees have always given the report most of the time. Or always, I think my friend Dinesh also is here. I think 99% of the reports must be unanimous.
So that's a lesson for us in the media. Pay more attention to the standing committees, not to the microphones and the chairs that might be flying around otherwise. Yes, sir.
Working now. This long-term energy policy, which is the official document, which projects that by 2033, we will be importing 90% oil, 50% gas, 40% coal, and the share of renewable energy, which is today 6% in energy terms, will be only 3%. And this is premised on the basis that energy efficiency measures would have been taken. So is the new government going to have a relook at it? Because it appears very strange when we are going to say our main resource is going to be solar, and also we already today have wind. On what basis this new approach will be done? Because when we look at our internal security, obviously this kind of import dependence on imports cannot continue.
In fact, if you really look at it, all the challenge that we faced, rupee was depreciating hugely and all that, everybody was blaming the poor gold. Gold is never poor, but the gold was getting blamed. The real cause of that, in a substantial way, was energy. Of course, there is one redeeming feature of that is that the countries from where we import energy also are the countries from where we get about $70 billion of remittances. India is the single largest recipient of remittances in the world, and bulk of those remittances come from the same region. So somewhere it is. But at the same time, the challenge India is facing today is not energy sector alone, which is energy sector's problem, but going far beyond that, even the macro issues are related to that. Or even take subsidies, which we talked about. And we have a huge subsidy on account of all of that, fertilizer subsidy, something to do with energy. The food subsidy, because we use so much of energy, because without pumping out water, we cannot produce electricity, produce agriculture. So all of that is related to energy in any way, besides energy. So I think we really need to move towards a system whereby our energy independence is actually assured. And therefore, I fully agree, and that's my firm belief, that we really need to move towards renewable energies in a significant way. Now that we move towards renewable energy, there are another huge benefits, which will again, on account of climate change. Now today, some people are asking what is the reason why there is a landslide, why there is so much of rain. There was no rain for 1 month, and there is so much of rain in a day, which was far more than what we could have received in a month. So this is all also on account of climate change. And this is what was not just even the 4th assessment and now the 5th assessment of IPCC very clearly has concluded. And this is almost like a multi-country scientists agreeing on one thing. So not only in parliament is difficult for an agreement, but scientists agreeing is far more difficult. So they agreed on that. And therefore, I think moving towards renewable makes a lot of sense on many reasons, going beyond energy itself. And therefore, I think we really need to work on that. But how do you, will it happen by just policy? No. We really need to invest a lot of money into research and development. And this has been one of my biggest grouse, that India was the first country in the world to create a ministry for renewable energy. The first country, not even Germany, didn't do that. But we were thinking that, we have done a job because we have created a ministry. Now nothing else to be done. So anybody who was asking about what are you doing on renewable energy, we have a renewable energy ministry, independent ministry. So that job is done. Now we have created it. Globally we could talk about it. Had that ministry invested into research and development, and this is what, again, I have been saying in the parliament, just 1% or even 0.5% of GDP since we set up that ministry, and on areas where we have a large concern. For example, how to improve the efficiency of solar panels, going beyond 17-18%. How do you make energy storage a possibility? Because even for moving to renewable, we need energy storage. How do you make energy out of oceanic sources? Because we have 7,600 kilometers of coastline. How do you make sure that even our thermal energy, the auxiliary consumption, the use of it, how do you make it more efficient? So I think some of these areas, of course, that thermal is not really the renewable issue, but I'm talking about making investment into research and development. So even if you now want to make sure that we move towards renewable energy, policy is one part, technology will be another important part, and then something on ground to make sure to take people on board, making them understand this is something which can happen if you participate in that. I think all this will really happen. I think I also appreciate your contribution. As the chairman of CRC, you did a lot in terms of promoting renewable energy. So I think I really appreciate that. But going beyond this is a regulator summit, so I'm sure the other 28 regulators would also have to work on that. We have a renewable purchase obligation, which is part of Electricity Act. But unfortunately, that is not getting implemented. So I think if you work on that, so the RPO will be a pull. The technology will be a push. Policy will be an umbrella support. If you work with Army, Navy and Air Force at the same time, I think we'll be able to achieve it far greater in the years to come.
Some more questions. Mr. Trivedi, right here.
May I make suggestion? Sir, you referred to, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, to the distributed generation system. But at the same time, have you given a thought that the distributed generation system would come from solar, wind and some such sources? The cost of generation from this technology is very high. How, so whether the government is prepared to subsidize this or who would afford this? It is beyond affordable prices. And so this thought has to be given. And also, the storage in this respect has to be given the topmost importance. Once you have the storage for this energy, because you will have to think about when the solar and wind is not available or this, during the night time, say, solar is not there, how do you meet this requirement? This is one very big question which we have. So grid connectivity would become an essential requirement in such cases. This is number one. Number two, the regulatory commissions reference always comes, the state regulatory commissions and all. Are we doing anything to increase awareness and the kind of an education of the political system, the politicians who are involved, who become the source of violators of the law in the broad sense, that we have made the Electricity Act and we don't follow the Electricity Act and violate it under one premises or the other. Whether you said that in the morning it was said that the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister meetings on frequent intervals would be being done. So that area needs to be attended so that a visionary approach is followed in this sector. Then the next one I want to say about the renewable source of energy. You are aware that the renewable source of energy have created a problem in the conventional sector, in Germany especially. They have the total installed capacity of 60,000 megawatt on wind and solar, and the conventional is 1,20,000 megawatt, and their total demand is 60,000 megawatt. So if the sun shines and wind blows, they are able to meet their total requirement from this source. But the conventional power generation has to be back down to 10%, 20%. This has damaged their conventional machines of 750 and 800 megawatt. And the Germany is now thinking what to do about it, how to go about it.
So what would the specific point be that you're asking Mr. Prabhu? Or is it a question or is it a remark?
No, it's a question also. So we have to give a direction to the conventional generators to incorporate in certain specifications, certain material changes, etc. So any thought being given to this direction or not? I don't know.
See, you're talking about distributed generation, right?
One, and the education of the political system, and the renewables.
No, there is, when we talk about distributed generation, is a concept. We have to convert that into a project. So I think what we really need to probably find out is how much of the renewable energy sources or whatever sources are available in each and every district of India. I think that is something which we should try to work on. I think one of the NGO is working on it, is to create an energy map of India. Where is what source of energy. Again, as you know, this unpredictability of wind or even solar sometimes. So what we really need to do is to think about hybrid systems, wherein we could have, because we need still base load, we also need some sort of a peak demand. Then that attendant to that, that's what I was mentioning about energy storage. I think that could help in a significant way. But more importantly, I think the grid that you talk about, evacuation issues, we should think about microgrids in a significant way. And I think now, in any case, we are talking about smart grid options. There is nothing like smart grid, again, is a product. It is also process. So we really need to find out how we could work on these small little areas, hamlets, because we probably connect a village to a grid, but not the households to the grid, not all the hamlets to the grid. So I think in Rajasthan, for example, each hamlet on their own will be like a village. So I think we really need to, therefore, look at it in a customized solution for all these issues. Regulation must come in terms of supporting such local initiative. Again, there cannot be one regulation. That's what I was saying. A central regulator can look at, of course, in any case, their mandate is limited to interstate and issues like that. But particularly to take into account all these local issues, the regulation also must be as local as possible, must allow a different type of innovation to take place. So I think the regulators also will have to work in a way that they promote regulation and do not go for regimentation. So regulation cannot be just one single regimentation which has been made and therefore it is available for years to come. In fact, on a separate note, I've been personally thinking that why should regulators pass an order on, say, once in a quarter or six? Why not you have every month monitoring of whatever are the losses you are suffering in that particular area? Why not you look at it every month and look at, if you want to revise tariff or you want to whatever is that, but look at why a utility is losing money on a month-to-month basis.
Somewhat like petroleum. I mean, we've technically allowed companies to set pricing.
We should really look at, so different type of, so regulators' role in my opinion is going to be far, far more important in the years to come. They're already important but will become far more important. And if the regulators can actually discharge their role in a much efficient way, you can imagine how much more we could accomplish. Because we should not go back to the old system wherein the government will decide everything. That's a great achievement in terms of making sure that we have taken the power out of government and given it to the regulators. But if regulators do not use it or do not effectively bring about a change through use of those powers, after a while there is going to be a chorus saying that regulation has failed.
That's a separate debate in itself. I mean, do regulators really regulate or do governments regulate? I'd like to hear Mr. Deo's comment on that, but let's just hear from Mr. Trivedi as well. I think, sir, you had a comment earlier.
No, I totally agree with Salman that two of the best people are not in parliament. And can you imagine the burden you have left on me to substitute both of you? In fact, I wanted to have observation on a very lighter note, but then I pass it because I understand there's a lot of media out here, and tomorrow's headlines would be totally different, and so I would pass that. But the serious question is this, that while we are talking geopolitics, and Salman and Suresh, both of you have been in very important positions, but something happened to Suresh in between. While he was batting, he was called back to the pavilion. We still don't know why. I can also add myself in that category. So, but having said that, Salman, in the next 15 years, whatever is happening in America, they could be net exporter of energy, shale gas and all those stuff, which is a reality. And they are not going to be so much engaged, like Mr. Taneja very rightly said, in the Middle East. One of the countries in the area is Saudi Arabia. And we would have a lot of energy needs. It's still met by Saudi Arabia. Strategy and planning is very, very important for any country to be ahead. Do you think it is the right time at this moment to have a long-term relationship with Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia also would be looking for some big buyer. And nobody could be a bigger buyer than India. So do you think strategically, as far as foreign policy is concerned, energy need is concerned, we should be engaging Saudi Arabia to look at the future? That's number one. Number two, on the standing committee, I totally agree. It's one of the best places to be and a lot of serious work which gets done there. But the only unfortunate part, Suresh, which you know, that the report of the standing committee is just not accepted. It is toothless, absolutely toothless. I think we should convert that into like the congressional committees of USA, where whatever is decided there, you can't reject it, because it's all party and it's a very serious debate which goes on there. So I think somewhere down the line, there should be a lot of pressure from the people at large, because that is the only forum where private sector organizations, they can go as witness. They can give their suggestions. This is the best platform. I totally agree with Suresh on that front. Salman.
Well, I think you've got the right emphasis on what we need to do. Amongst other things, we already have, I think, very good engagement with Saudi Arabia. We are working with Saudi Arabia on many strategic issues. We are working with them, for instance, and they have been enormously helpful as far as our fight against terrorism is concerned. That was one dark area, and we've made major improvements there, and I'm sure there's still a long way to go, but we've made some major improvements with them. But there is, we work with them and bilaterally, we work with them through the GCC, we work with them a little bit multilaterally, but I think there is a lot more that we can do by way of investing there in our relationship. Certainly, I think we haven't made a major breakthrough in terms of their investments in India. They are looking at investments in India. There have been shocks to them as far as the Western markets are concerned. I think we just need to be a little more welcoming in order to bring them over. It'll still take some time for us to align the way we think. I think there are some issues there. We need to align the way we think, which means accommodation, adjustment on both sides. But we have, I think, potentially a good partner in Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia has problems with some of its own Arab colleagues. They have problems with some of their own Arab colleagues. They still have problems in the region, and therefore alignment does mean that you have to show a degree of patience and understanding, but we need to work closer with them, and I think for the future it's important that we work closely with them. Now, one thing is, obviously we've made it clear, and I imagine the new government will do the same, is that there's no question of India filling in a military role with the withdrawal of United States of America. We do a little bit off the African coast, for instance. We do send a ship, or we put a ship in that region once in a while, a naval asset, in order to make those lanes safe and to fight piracy. But large-scale operations, visits, temporary visits, training, exchange of personnel is something that's already started and will continue. But we can't really foot the bill in the manner in which the Americans do now and will continue to do. So our suggestion to them has been that they should really build up their own ability and capacity to protect themselves. We can be both in an advisory role and in terms of training and exchange of information, we can be a very good partner to them.
You know, just to add to what Salman said and on cooperation with Saudi Arabia, and not just Saudi Arabia, but the entire Middle East, probably, and Africa again, is not my idea, our present Prime Minister's idea. Could we bring all those countries with 300 days of sunshine together? What would happen is, if you create a club like this, there's an OPEC, which actually all producing, exporting countries. But if you actually have a club of countries which have ability to produce more solar energy because they have got sunshine.
The Sunshine Club.
Because without a sunshine club. In fact, I was telling my Japanese friend the other day that you are a land of shining sun, or rising sun, but we are a land of shining sun. Because sun shines here, not there. So you can develop technology, but where are you going to use it? It has to be used in India. So all those countries, we have got 300 days of sunshine, including Saudi Arabia. We could bring them together. The advantage will be that we'll be able to produce far more solar energy, and if such scaling up takes place, because so many countries are going to use solar energy at the same time, just sheer scaling up will bring down the cost of production. So we'll all benefit from it. So this is one on Saudi Arabia we should think about. On the standing committees, I fully agree with you, and in fact, now we should, that was the first generation standing committees which, when Mr. Shivraj Patil was a speaker, he introduced it. Now we really need to bring in second generation standing committees, in which what precisely you said must happen. The buck must stop there. Whatever decision of the standing committee should be the finality, and it should no longer left for the government to rescind it. This should not be possible. Secondly, we should try to think about is evaluating the performance of a bureaucrat, a secretary or others in the standing committee. Because, you know, there is a system today that you evaluate a performance through ACR, and annual confidential report. And very good part is that we get excellent for almost all the bureaucrats. Or because, normally it happens. There are some excellent bureaucrats also. They deserve to get it. But I'm saying it's not that everybody should get excellent. There should be some sort of an evaluation, like an independent evaluation. This could happen, the standing committee, through a completely well-defined process. So there cannot be any political element that can be brought in. First. Second, that second element of that. Third element of this is that how do you evaluate? Normally the standing committees evaluate the demands of grant. When the budget is presented, all the demands of grant pertaining to that particular ministry goes to the standing committees. Could we think about evaluating the performance of the ministry in terms of their targets? Why should not the standing committees evaluate it? So I fully agree with you that now standing committees having succeeded in achieving a great deal of objective, we should move towards the second generation standing committees. And like in case of US, this is one system in India where you could appoint anybody without a parliamentary approval. I think that's good, that executive has the right, but there should be some checks and balances in which some of the key appointments should be confirmed by the respective standing committees who could also evaluate the performance of the functionaries of that particular ministry. This could be a transformational change that could really happen in terms of oversight, which is a constitutional requirement that Parliament must have oversight over the executive. But how does the Parliament exercise that oversight without having the tools of doing it? And this could be the biggest tool that could be available.
The only tool seems to be walkout, but anyway.
Quickly add, they've taken away the mic because he thought that politicians will not leave the mic, but it's okay. What I'm trying to say is that if you want to have a participating democracy, that is the only forum where you would really have a participating democracy. Because we have had a lot of discussion on the street. Take, for example, Anna Hazare movement, which I totally also support. But instead of the movement going haywire, here is a platform where anybody can come before the committee. They can't come before the parliament. So in order to strengthen democracy, I think you need to do it, and this is the forum. I think somebody must take the lead and put pressure on the powers to be.
Absolutely. We have a former deputy CAG here.
Thanks. I have two specific questions. One is on this ISIS issue, which came up. I want Salman to slightly elaborate, if he can, on what is the likely impact going to be on our energy security within the context of what Dr. Deo said, is the vision and the plan to keep importing power on the energy on the one hand, and on the other hand, the uncertainty that you talked about. So, I think that's my first question. And the second question is to Mr. Suresh Prabhu, is recently there was a judgment on this question of gas. And the judgment was that gas is a natural asset, it's a national asset. And anybody who's doing whatever he's doing is doing it in the form of, for want of a better word, as a contractor. And therefore, he doesn't own it, he's just doing it on behalf of the government, there's a production sharing contract, blah, 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 etc., etc. My question is, if you are an international conglomerate which is looking at wealth, is this the policy that is adopted across the world? Or is this something that we have come up with in India, thanks to a judicial order, where you rightly said the executive sometimes doesn't perform? And is this going to attract foreign investment? Two questions.
So you want to take up the energy security?
On the ISIS, I think it's still a bit early. I imagine the real impact is on what might happen with Iraq. I think the worry for stability in this entire larger region is tendency for breakup of Iraq, of Afghanistan possibly, though I hope that that worst peril is over. And of course, Syria, where they seem to have stabilized into a détente of a very unwholesome kind. But these are things that can blow up. It's possibly because of Palestine and Gaza that attention has gone off Iraq and Syria, but it'll come back. So the overall, obviously the overall impact, if these things crack up and break up, would be a lasting impact. But I'm not sure that these were really alternatives for us. Iraq was a standby, an alternative, and part of diversifying our energy sources. So in that sense, it doesn't have a direct impact, but I think in long term, it could have consequences. But I don't think that ISIS is being taken as seriously in terms of a ideological threat. But obviously there are problems. I can't simply say that it's not a problem. There's obviously are problems. Islamic world must tackle with it first and then others. But it obviously is clear that more than the Islamic world is involved in it. There are others who are playing games as well. And is their intent limited to their immediate objectives vis-a-vis Iraq and that region, even Afghanistan maybe, or is it a larger, I won't call it a conspiracy, but a larger game plan which involves energy security?
But sir, on the subject of Iraq, I think the latest numbers say some 12 to 13% of imports are coming from there. So in case this blowout were to happen, which zone, which geographical zone do you think could be then the quickest fix from the Indian perspective?
Well, the geographical zone that's the quickest fix is the Kurdistan. I mean, that's an area that would be fine. But I think that whoever takes over will need to sell that oil. So I don't think that the major impact would be very great, but disruptions take place, security issues. We were actually thinking of setting up refineries in Iraq till about a year ago. We were being asked to actually encourage the government in Iraq to invite people to come from here, both in terms of building of infrastructure, of maintenance, of petrochemicals. Now, we all believe that Iraq was a good bet to invest in, despite security still being a question mark, as a part of the diversification of sources. Because if one source fails, you have another one available to you. But I think this diversification effort obviously gets stalled.
Sure. The second question, I think, was for you.
No, I was just saying, generally, today we are a $2 trillion economy. And I'm sure about it, in the next 15 years, we could easily be something like close to 10 trillion or 15, maybe become 20 years, depends upon the rate of growth. But just imagine, at that time, with all the GST coming in, hopefully tax administration improving, the government will, with the tax GDP ratio of something like maybe 30%, we could have $3 trillion of revenue coming into the government. Are we equipped in decision-making process to disperse to spend $3 trillion of money every year? What are the systems we have put in place to make that happen? And therefore, these contracts, and when we actually bid for it, what is the expertise that we have developed within the system to make this happen? Wherein we are supposed to get a globally competitive bid, we are supposed to actually get a process wherein we don't lose, and they also benefit. That's something which always we benefit, they benefit, nobody loses. So if we have a system like this, I think we really need to think about it very, very soon, about how to put those things in place. Otherwise, like what you mentioned, things will happen, and particularly when it happens, probably the entire interpretation of those executive decisions by the judiciary. I think we must have some system wherein there is some training which takes place in terms of even judicial officers being exposed and being sensitized about what are the new areas in which we are going to take decisions. So I think if we don't work on that, I personally feel that we'll always land up into one controversy or the other all the time. So we need to modernize the decision-making process itself.
So a quick supplementary to that question that just came. Obviously, great hopes from the new regime. Will the engagement with a lot of foreign majors be any different, any departure from the recent past? But at the same time, how do you reconcile the nationalist roots? Because, looking at, for instance, what's happened with WTO, just a day ago, a lot of questions are being asked as to how will India engage with the rest of the world?
They are completely two different issues. One is the multilateral negotiations. So WTO is a completely standalone issue.
This we're talking more
corporate
corporate
but it's
one-to-one.
a completely a standalone issue. But so how do you actually engage in multilateral negotiations? This is not just confined to WTO. It's also now very soon we will have, early next in France, we are going to have negotiations on climate change. So which is, in my opinion, far more important than WTO, because the implications of climate change, caps if we took, commitment we accept, then the implication of that economic activity will be far more greater in terms of restriction that would be put on India. But so this is, one is multilateral. The second part is purely investment. Commercial investment within the country.
Yes.
You know, I don't think we have any choice but to get foreign investment for a simple reason, is that our savings ratio, which had actually climbed to 37%, thanks to my previous government, came down drastically by 7-8 points, and now we don't have a choice but to get foreign investment into India. That time also we always needed it, but still we had a domestic investment possible. But now with lower savings rate, which has to rise, but even if with rising savings rate and we go to that historic high of 37%, even then we need a huge investment in India. For example, just one number which Planning Commission gives, which is actually just become only academic, is that $1 trillion of investment into infrastructure in the next 5 years. So just imagine the quantum of money that we need. And this is not just going to be possible within the system, within the country. So inevitably, we'll have to get foreign investment into India.
True. Well, we need the investment. Let's see if the engagement is going to be any different to get that investment in and to ensure it lasts
I think
for
there's
long
very
term.
something interesting. In the month of September, I think all our economic ministers are going to New York and meeting for the first time on the sidelines of UN Assembly. So it's going to be a very interesting engagement of Indian government and talking to the foreign investors for them to invest in India and to understand the sensitivities, to also to explain to them our sensitivities. Because when we want investment, obviously we want them on our terms too, and without compromising on their commercial interests. So this always has to be a trade-off between the national interest and the commercial interest.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. Fantastic session. Thank you.
Well, sir.